Hi everyone, meteorologist Brian Bennett. So much going on in the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico. We have three hurricanes right now in the Atlantic Ocean, and we have this new system trying to develop right now east of the Yucatan Peninsula. The biggest story would be Hurricane Florence. The storm is heading for the Carolinas. You've probably heard of Hurricane Hugo, maybe Hurricane Fran or Hurricane Hazel. It's possible if this hurricane stays on path and moves on shore, like it is expected to do in the Carolinas, that Florence will be another name that you end up hearing for many years to come due to the impact that it could potentially have. Isaac, moving towards the Caribbean, still lots of uncertainties about this storm, but I'll take a look at some of the models with you. Helene, not concerned about this, even though it's a huge storm. It's going to move off to the west-northwest and eventually take a turn to the north, keeping it east of Bermuda and east of making landfall anywhere in the U.S. And then we have Invest 95L that just developed over western Cuba. It's going to move off to the west-northwest towards the northwestern Gulf of Mexico, possibly becoming a tropical depression or a weak tropical storm. Looking at the infrared satellite in motion, you can see all these storms out there. It's ridiculous how much activity we have. Pretty rare to have four storms going at the same time across the Atlantic basin. So the oceans are not happy right now. Add in red tide as well, and there's just a whole lot happening in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. Here's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center for Hurricane Florence, and we do have a major hurricane right now east of Miami, latitude-wise. Winds are 140 miles per hour sustained. It's moving off to the west-northwest at 13 miles per hour. It could strengthen a little bit more and possibly even become a strong Cat 4 or maybe even a Cat 5 hurricane, and then maybe weakening just a tad right before it makes landfall, but nonetheless could make landfall as a very major hurricane, possibly around the Wilmington, North Carolina area. That's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center. Here's a look at the spaghetti model plots, and for the most part, everybody's on the same page of the storm making landfall in North Carolina, but I gotta say, the possibility still does exist that the storm could make landfall anywhere from, say, the Virginia, North Carolina border as far south as into South Carolina. So even though we don't have any spaghetti model plots taking the storm into South Carolina, Myrtle Beach and Charleston, really you shouldn't put your eye off on this quite yet because the storm is not written in stone at this moment. We still have some wiggle room where this storm could head, but right now though the models are kind of honing in on the Wilmington area, and some models doing some wacky things too. A couple of models are actually having the storm do a complete circle before making its way on shore, indicating that there still is some uncertainty with the track forecast. Here's the intensity forecast. Pretty much every model keeping it a Cat 4 hurricane, maybe dipping into a Cat 5 hurricane, and then obviously weaken once it moves on shore. Here's a closer view of the infrared satellite, and this is about as textbook hurricane as you can get. This storm has the cirrus clouds wrapping anticyclonically around the storm. You have a very concentric area of the eye in the middle. You have the eye wall that's continuing to rebuild. We're seeing a lot of lightning as well in parts of the eye wall, which usually happens before we have a rapid intensification. So a very strong hurricane. Here's a look at one of the buoys on the very edge of the storm, and I'll be watching these buoys because one interesting thing nowadays is they're actually equipped with cameras so we can see conditions as they start to deteriorate. But you can kind of see here from this picture to the next picture that the waves have this buoy just kind of bobbing around out in the Atlantic Ocean. So the storm is approaching, and it's all because this son of a blocking high that we have off to our north. This red color here represents high pressure. If it wasn't for this high, the storm would say, all right, dude, peace out. I'm not concerned about going to land. I'm going to go straight north. But nonetheless, this high pressure is like a big stop sign preventing the storm from moving north. And that's what we call a blocking high. And that's what happened with Hurricane Sandy as well back in New York City, and that's why that storm moved on there. And this is what's directing Florence to move on shore in the Carolinas. Now, exactly how high this blocking high ends up being when the storm makes landfall, how far south or north the high is, that's going to control exactly where landfall occurs with this hurricane. So lots going on the big picture to determine where this storm is heading. Okay, so let's jump into the computer models. The model that I trust the most with hurricane forecasting is the European computer model. And here's Florence with the latest European, and you can see it has it making landfall right around the Wilmington, North Carolina area, and then going on shore still with pretty strong winds and some very heavy rain. And the European model has a storm then turning to the north, remaining primarily east of the Appalachians with the stronger winds. So still lots of uncertainty what's going to happen beyond landfall, but right now the European has it kind of turning to the north and dissolving a little bit. All right, so that's the European computer model. The second most trusted model in my book of weather computer models would be the HWRF, and the HWRF has the storm making landfall in the exact same location, just north of Wilmington, North Carolina. Here's the South Carolina border here, and here's the Cape Hatteras area out here, and Cape Fear and Wilmington is right about here. So exact same location, winds blowing very strong, sustained over 100 miles per hour. So very strong major hurricane as it moves on shore. The H-Wharf then has it moving very slowly. In fact, it takes 24 hours for this storm to go from making landfall to making it to Raleigh, North Carolina, which is not very far away. So that's a lot of time period over the same location. So lots of strong winds for a long duration of time. That also allows a lot more rain to fall as well. So we're looking at a multiple threat here of storm surge, strong winds, power outages obviously will be occurring, and heavy rain as well. Here's a look at the GFS computer model, the American model. It does pretty well as well, but perhaps not quite as well as the European. The GFS has a storm doing something really interesting here. It has a storm making a turn to the north, doing a full 360, and then still making landfall in northern North Carolina, and then actually going due west. That's a really wacky thing, but hey, hurricanes have done things very similar to this, so can't write that scenario off. But I have to say I'm probably buying into the European option a little bit more than what is happening with the GFS. I like to show you a lot of different computer models because what's really important is looking at the model consistency. When you have every model doing something completely different, that gives me pretty low faith about the track and the intensity of the storm. But when every computer model is doing the same thing, that gives you a lot more confidence about where the storm's going to head and how strong it's going to be. This is the NavGem model, and it's taken the storm into the same general area, a little bit different track to get there, but taking it into the Wilmington area and then off to the west, perhaps having a bit more of an impact on the Appalachians, where we could see wind gust tropical storm force all the way up and down parts of eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, and perhaps some stronger winds into northern Georgia and Tennessee if the NavGem model ends up being correct on its track. All right, the CMC is not loading right now. This is called the ICON model and the ICON. And let's take a look where the storm is heading with this model. It did pretty well with our last tropical storm. So let's see where it's predicting this. Landfall in northern North Carolina as a major hurricane right over Cape Hatteras area, and then moving slowly to the north. Now, this would be devastating for northeastern North Carolina, heading up into the Delmarva Peninsula. It would keep the storm stronger for a longer period of time because it would be tapping into the warm Atlantic waters. So this is not a great scenario, but it would be a better scenario for parts of South Carolina and even inland North Carolina if the storm does start to drift up to the north just a little bit more than what some of the other models are calling for. I even have access to the Japanese model. This is what the Japanese are predicting. Similar thing, storm moving in on shore in parts of eastern central North Carolina, just north of the Wilmington area. I think this is really this could be a pretty accurate track based on all the different tracks I'm looking at just north of Wilmington. And then the Japanese model is actually taking the storm off to the north and kind of dying, which is pretty similar to what the European is doing as well. The HMON model, not a Jamaican model, but the HMON, HMON, actually has a storm making landfall in the same general vicinity. So we're seeing a lot of model consistency with the storm making landfall between Cape Hatteras down to about the Wilmington area. So we're starting to get some pretty high confidence that this major hurricane is going to be making landfall in that vicinity. Again, keep in mind we do have some wiggle room where the storm could go a little bit farther north, a little bit farther south, but this kind of gives you a ballpark of what you can expect and the conditions that can be expected along the track of this storm as well. So speaking of conditions, let's look at some of those. This is the European computer model showing you the maximum winds that would be occurring from the storm. So where the storm makes landfall, which will be somewhere right around the Wilmington area or perhaps even a little bit farther north, we'll have winds blowing perhaps 130, maybe 140 miles per hour right along the coastline, and then hurricane force winds all the way in through most of North Carolina. That includes parts of Raleigh, North Carolina as well, where we could see winds exceeding 74 miles per hour. So very strong winds for everybody in the path, and that even stretches up into parts of Virginia where we could see tropical storm force winds or maybe even wind gusts that are in the Category 1 hurricane range. So a lot of wind damage, a lot of trees are going to come down, folks are going to lose power in all these coastal areas, even all the way inland to as far as the Raleigh area. Lots of power outages, so folks in that area need to be prepared to possibly not have power for several weeks due to the amount of trees that are going to come down and the damage that's going to occur. How much rainfall? Well, water is a major concern. We're going to see a lot of rain in the purple there. You're looking at the possibility for perhaps 20 inches of rain spreading up through parts of North Carolina and even to Virginia. It's looking like this storm actually wants to dissolve and kind of die over parts of North Carolina and Virginia, and that leaves the storm to drop a lot of rain over a 2 or maybe even a 3-day period. So freshwater flooding is going to be a major concern as well. So we're going to see a lot of roads washed out due to all the heavy rain that's going to occur from this storm. And of course, storm surge is a very deadly aspect of the storm as well. You got to check this out. This is showing wave heights based on the European computer model. And take a look at the storm as it approaches land. And that color there, the pinkish color, those are 40-foot waves that are forecasted to be attached to this storm while it is offshore. So offshore, we're going to have waves that are around 40 feet, as tall as a 3 or 4-story building. So massive waves. So even if this storm takes a turn to the north, we're still looking at incredibly large surf, lots of erosion, and some really dangerous conditions along the coastlines. And that would really be kind of a best case scenario, still a pretty big impact from the storm. So as it moves closer to North Carolina, those waves do start to diminish a little bit, but we're still looking at waves on the order of 10 to 20 feet. So some very angry and large surf occurring along Virginia and the Carolinas as the storm approaches landfall. All right, this is a new product here. This shows you storm surge possibility. And here we are, Wilmington, North Carolina, where the National Hurricane Center currently has a storm roughly making its landfall. And keep in mind, this is going to move to the north or to the south a little bit, so don't take this as a written word. But as you can see, on the northeastern quadrant of the storm, we're looking at the possibility for storm surge right around 11 or 12 feet. So Surf City, Emerald Isle, Morehead City, we could see storm surge 10, 11 feet possible. And I can even zoom in. Let's zoom in a little bit here to give you kind of a better idea of the impacts this could have. We're looking at Cape Fear River possibly exceeding its banks and flooding parts of Wilmington. So a lot of water being pushed up into the waterways. So it's a little difficult to see here, but basically Cape Fear River is not this big as what's being colored here. That's because the water is exceeding the banks and flooding a lot of the Wilmington area. And you can even see the water making it on shore past these barrier islands by a good 5, 6, 7, 8 miles or so. So big time storm surge for area rivers, freshwater rivers, and also areas along the immediate coastline as well. So what storm can we compare this to? Because I think one of the best ways to determine what's going to happen with a storm is to look to see what has happened in the past with somewhat similar storms. And right now it looks like Hurricane Fran would be the storm that most resembles the track or the potential track for Florence. Never mind that they both begin with the letter F. It's not the four-letter word F, although I think a lot of folks might be saying that with this track heading that direction. But nonetheless, Fran, a very similar hurricane. So let's quickly look at some pictures from Hurricane Fran, which I believe was back in 1996. Okay, here's some pictures from Hurricane Fran back in 1996 after it hit the coast of North Carolina. And you can see the devastation that it caused, the amount of sand that came up. It destroyed the homes and the condos in the area. Here's another picture of a home completely demolished. Another picture, same scene goes. This is Topsail, North Carolina, showing the horrible erosion and devastation to the beachfront properties. Here's a picture from Raleigh, North Carolina, showing the freshwater flooding that occurred in that location. So even though it's fairly far inland, Raleigh can have wind damage. And in fact, I think with Fran, Raleigh had a wind gust of 79 miles per hour. So we can still have strong winds inland, but especially that freshwater flooding as well. All right, I wanted to show you this real quick. This is an article written by a meteorologist, Marshall Shepard, who is doing a few articles for Forbes magazine. And his quote here: according to damage and casualty reports from Hurricane Sandy, again, this is Hurricane Sandy, 19% of the 106 deaths that occurred from Sandy were due to falling trees. Other reasons include 37% of the deaths occurred due to drowning. That includes storm surge and freshwater flooding. Actually, 11% due to falls and other injuries happening after the storm. Carbon monoxide, 8%, illnesses and sicknesses, 6%, fire, 5%, auto accident, 4%, and other reasons, 10%. So I feel like we need to get the word out as much as possible to the folks in the path of this storm, primarily in North Carolina, because drowning is something that we can largely prevent by folks evacuating from the areas right along the storm surge area, right along the coast, and folks evacuating in areas that have previously flooded along freshwater rivers. So we can really get the freshwater and storm surge drowning threat down, and let's try to get that word out to folks in North Carolina. Falls, not too much can be done there. I'm clumsy myself, so I would probably fall in that category with my luck. Carbon monoxide, that could largely be due to people putting generators in their homes after the storm. And of course, we know, don't put the generator indoors, keep it outdoors. Don't leave your car running in the garage to be a source to charge your cell phones, etc. So we can get this number down as well. Fires, don't use candles after a hurricane. Use flashlights and lanterns for lights, so we can really get this 5% down as well. Auto accidents, that can be brought down by having less folks drive around during or after the storm. So a lot of these numbers I feel like we can really get down if folks are aware of the biggest dangers from the storm, and most importantly, they evacuate from any potentially dangerous area, which would be right along the shore, where the winds are going to be most dangerous, and of course right along the freshwater flooding locations as well. Switching gears, this is Hurricane Isaac from the National Hurricane Center, expecting it to remain a hurricane as it moves into the Lesser Antilles and perhaps diminishing a little bit to a tropical storm. But I think this track from the National Hurricane Center may be actually instilling a bit more confidence than we perhaps should have on the track and even the intensity of Isaac. A lot of uncertainties, and that's due to all the upper level wind shear that's happening from all the nearby hurricanes that could weaken or strengthen this storm and also control the direction as well. Here's the spaghetti model plots. A lot of the spaghetti models agree that the storm's going to go due westward over the Lesser Antilles, but could actually then make a turn to the north over the Dominican Republic. So you can see there's still a lot of uncertainty there. This is actually a picture that was just taken from the buoy that's just about to be run over from Hurricane Isaac, which is actually getting dark in that location, so it's part of the reason it's so dark. You can see the pressure really dropping from the buoy out in the Atlantic Ocean, again about to be run over by Hurricane Isaac. It could actually go right in the eye of the storm. So here's a look at the European computer model. And again, I want to focus not on Hurricane Florence anymore, but now on Isaac. So Isaac is right here in the bottom right corner of your screen. And you can see the European has it moving over the northern Lesser Antilles and then staying just south of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is right there. The European has it moving south of Puerto Rico and really not being a very strong storm, a tropical depression or maybe a tropical storm according to the European. And then for the most part, it kind of gives up once it moves westward, encountering more wind shear. The H-Wharf model, let me actually move this up a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. The H-Wharf model has the storm moving over the Lesser Antilles, jogging off to the west. Here's Puerto Rico right here. So Puerto Rico would perhaps be encountering tropical storm force conditions with winds between 39 and 73 miles per hour if this track confirms. But the H-Wharf actually wants to keep the storm a hurricane while it's at the same longitude as Puerto Rico. So if the storm were to move a little bit farther north, that could bring hurricane type conditions to parts of Puerto Rico, which is not anything anybody in that location wants to hear, as we're still picking up the pieces from Hurricane Maria and parts of Puerto Rico. The H-Wharf only goes out this far, but not really telling us whether it's going to continue westward or going to make that turn to the north. Here's the American model, the GFS. It takes the storm over the Lesser Antilles as perhaps a Category 1 hurricane, and then going off to the west-northwest, getting a little too close to Puerto Rico for comfort, still possibly a strong tropical storm or a weaker Category 1 hurricane. Again, intensity is not a thing the models are real great at, so I think folks in Puerto Rico need to really watch this storm pretty closely in case it does end up being a hurricane as it moves over Puerto Rico, but hopefully it'll move south, and that's what is forecast by most of the models right now. This is interesting though. The GFS actually has the storm making a turn to the north over the Dominican Republic and then intensifying over the warm Caribbean waters in the eastern Bahamas and becoming a pretty legit hurricane if it makes that turn to the north. So a lot of uncertainties with Hurricane Isaac, and that's just a storm we're going to need to watch pretty closely, as I think we're going to see that track change quite a bit and those intensity forecasts change quite a bit as well. Okay, here's a real quick look at Hurricane Helene, possibly becoming a major hurricane, which means Category 3, 4, or 5 as it continues westward, but then is forecast to make a northerly turn, and every indication is that this storm is going to stay out to sea, east of Bermuda, and away from land, which is great news. We don't need another hurricane. We have enough storms out there with Florence, Isaac, and of course Helene as well, but this fortunately is one that we can mark off of our worry list. This storm over here is just kind of a blob of storms around the eastern part of the Yucatan Peninsula and western Cuba. The National Hurricane Center is saying there's a 50% chance that this storm will develop into a tropical depression or a tropical storm over the next 5 days. Let's take a look at the European computer model and see what it does with this storm. And let's take this into the future. And you can see it has it starting to wrap up in the northern Gulf of Mexico, starting to get that counterclockwise circulation. And this particular model run of the European has it making landfall around perhaps Brownsville, Texas, as a tropical depression or even a tropical storm as it moves off to the northwest. But folks, especially in Louisiana, coastal Texas, and even Mexico, should watch the storm pretty closely. And really anybody in the Gulf. I'm going to go ahead and include western Florida in that as well, just in case in the unlikely scenario it makes a turn to the northeast. But right now, looks like this weak storm wants to move off to the northwest. So wrapping this all up, we have quite a bit going on in the Atlantic and the Gulf, but really the one that we're honing in on is Hurricane Florence, looking to make landfall on the 13th of September as a powerful major hurricane. Again, it could be one that we're talking about for quite a long period of time. It has a potential to knock out power for a lot of folks with trees down, so expect to be without power, possibly for several weeks for folks not only along the immediate coastline of the Carolinas, but for folks stretching 100, maybe 200 miles inland. And of course, the freshwater flooding, we've got to watch out for that being a major possibility, washing out roads, causing a lot of damage as well. And storm surge could be greater than 10 feet along the coastal locations as well. So Florence is going to be one we'll be watching very closely, in addition to Isaac as it moves westward, to see how that reacts in the Caribbean, and eventually if it were to make it as far as the Gulf of Mexico or even into the Western Atlantic. All right, folks, that's it for now. Of course, I'll keep you updated as we get closer to landfall with these storms. Till then, thank you for watching and have a great evening.